What's up, everybody? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast, powered by Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. After a lot of portal episodes and all that, I think we can finally say that the 2024 roster is set. Mostly, things happen, you never know. But I would say most likely we know what we're dealing with. So I wanted to take a look at really what Mario was brought in to do, which is overhaul the roster that he inherited. We're going to dive into that overhaul, compare how the positions groups looked when he got there, how they look now, and really take stock and see, have we gotten better? Have we gotten worse? Have we stayed the same? And really go in depth with Peter. So I think you guys are going to enjoy that. First, I want to talk about an outfit that doesn't need an overhaul, and that is Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you could be entitled to significant compensation. 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733. Take back control of your life with Anijar and Levine. Let's bring Peter in here. Pete. So 2021, 2022, when Mario really took over, you were still in the agent world. You had big opinions on where we were. I know you were steeped in discussions with agents about where players were going to get picked, how Miami looked as a roster. So before we get into sort of the overhaul position by position, in general, take us back to late 2021, early 2022, maybe in spring 2022. When scouts were looking at this roster, what were they seeing?
So in terms of the roster that Mario was taking over from Manny there, it was a lot of fringe talents, right, in terms of NFL talent, and not only the talent itself, but when I talked to the scouts, because obviously would try to figure out where certain guys were slated coming up, who should we recruit, who are guys who are potential draft picks. But as a Canes guy, obviously I would ask about what they thought about the team as a whole, right, for the season, and it was always kind of like, well, it's not a truly professional operation going on in there right now. Just the way things were run day to day. This was the end of the Manny era there, that last fall there, and then the summer leading up to it, right? And again, these scouts go all across the country. They see what it's supposed to look like, how the infrastructure is supposed to be run, and body types also were another thing. You didn't see a lot of NFL body types, right? Obviously, there's guys who can be great college players and then not amount to much in the NFL for those reasons. But generally, as we know and understand, that's one of the main things that Mario has had to do here in terms of flipping this roster around, is getting those next level body types, those frames that not only can win you games at this level, but end up going a long way on Sundays too.
All right, let's go position by position, starting with the most important position, which is the quarterback spot. You got some nice graphics here to really illustrate it. I'll read them out loud. Basically, a quarterback, I thought this was a position that was actually a position of strength in terms of Mario inheriting, which is Tyler Van Dyke coming off a very good finish to 2021 season with Rhett Lashley. Jake Garcia, who would flash in spring game and mop-up duty in some of the FCS game that he played as a freshman. Jakari Brown, four-star commit. I thought that was a pretty good group that Mario was inheriting, quite frankly, based on what they had shown to that point in their high school pedigree. Flash forward, though, to what Mario has. Cam Ward, you're talking about somebody with multiple years of production, both at the FCS level and then at the Pac-12. And, you don't have to project too much. It's not like Van Dyke where you're focusing on certain segments of hot and cold play. He's been a productive player pretty much since he started his college career, producing at a high level, extremely prolific. His season last year would have been the all-time leading passing season in Miami history, just to put in perspective. Reese Poffenbarger, somebody who's produced at the FCS level, but is been a key player for his team, the best player on his team, that ended up going as far as they've been in a long time. And Emory Williams, still learning about him, but he did beat Clemson last year and gave you a chance to win against Florida State in more of a game manager role. So as a true freshman, that's pretty good. As your third quarterback, that's pretty good. So I think just in terms of proven starting production, the quarterback room has been a massive improvement, Pete.
Yeah, and the biggest thing here, and it's kind of going to be a common theme across other positions, but quarterback, it's always of the utmost importance, is the depth there, where now that you have the roster surrounding it that we believe Mario has constructed here, knock on wood, but if a Cam Ward goes down, you feel like you have a couple guys there who can, in a week or two, you see this in the NFL all the time, right? The importance of the backup quarterback now, and teams are really starting to invest in it. But in college football, it's the same thing, right? So you feel like there are a few guys there. And then you have the Judd Anderson, who's a very nice developmental type, right? That you have the Reese Poffenbarger, you have Emery, of course, who we saw what he's got against Florida State. Obviously, there's still room to grow for him, but a lot of exciting things there in that room behind Cam Ward.
Yeah, and look, just to be clear, I thought Van Dyke was going to be a really, really good player coming off the end of 2021. So did national people, NFL scouts. He was on the radar. I mean, his stock was high, not just with Canes fans. So I don't want to diminish that just because of the way it turned out. But Cam Ward, in terms of how he's looked consistently at practice since he's been here, again, smaller sample there, but as far as his starting performance over multiple years, as opposed to just isolating a stretch here, a stretch there, I think that makes a big difference between Cam Ward and Van Dyke, even taking Van Dyke at the peak of his hype, which was the end of 2021. So,
and again, the backup situation, Jake had not proven much at that point. Again, you look at what they have behind Cam Ward right now, albeit it was at a different level of football, but Reese has shown that, and you've talked to a bunch of people around who've seen him in spring and are excited about what he can do as well. So, and then Emery, we saw it at Florida State on the road, so he showed a lot there.
Yeah, so we're agreeing on the massive upgrade at the quarterback position, which is the most important position. Moving on to running back, I think we're going to come to the same conclusion, which is massive upgrade. It's funny, both of these guys, Manny and Mario, did a good job of signing the local 4-star running backs. This was not a great time for South Florida running backs, at least Manny's time was, and we'll see on the guys Mario has signed. But really, it was, even though they signed the guys that they were supposed to sign locally, there hadn't been a great crop of running backs since James Cook in 2018. So you look at Jalen Knighton, Don Chaney, Thad Franklin, 3 blue chip guys, and Cody Brown from out of state, another 4-star. I think when you look at that room, off the field work ethic stuff, I know that doomed Knighton when he was here in Miami, ended up being a pretty good player for SMU now. Don Chaney, kind of the same thing, some of the durability stuff, and I think that reared its head. Thad Franklin couldn't keep his weight in check. I thought he was a guy that had a lot of potential, but when you're already a big guy and you have weight issues, it's hard to really keep it together. And then Cody Brown, I just think, just didn't have the athletic ability. Switch it to Mario's side of the ledger. You start at the top with Damian Martinez, who has rushed for over 2,000 yards, looking at his first 2 years at the Pac-12 level. This was an 18 and 19-year-old. So he's already one of the best backs in the country. No questions there. He has had some off-the-field issues in terms of a DWI, which, he had to address and Miami had to look at and everybody think cleared. But there's a guy who clearly takes care of his body. He's in tremendous shape, and the production speaks for itself. You got a Mark Fletcher, one of those blue chip local guys who I think, if you're talking about Knighton, Chaney, Franklin, Fletcher, I put Fletcher at the top of that group already, just by what he showed as a freshman. Certainly the character, the work ethic. I mean, this guy was in tremendous shape and really played hard, played well. Everything you hear about him, you like. He has a foot injury. He's working through it. But what you saw on the field, games like Virginia, where he had that run to win the game, just really the end of the season, the second half of the season, he was outstanding. I think he showed that he is a major factor in the ACC. Chris Johnson, jury's out. I think he's got a lot of speed and talent, blue chip local guy. AJ Allen, production-wise, similar to a guy like Don Chaney. He had about 300-plus yards last year. I think he's capable of more. He was a little banged up. And then Jordan Lyle, 4-star local. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey just got here for spring. Jury's out on those guys. I think, again, when you look at that room, the big difference is, number one, Martinez as a proven elite college running back, and then Fletcher, to me, is better than anybody that Manny had on the roster.
Yeah, and I think big playability is something that has been upgraded. Jalen Knighton had that explosiveness, but the ability to hang on to the football, that was obviously very inconsistent here. And you look at this group, Damian Martinez, although we've kind of pigeonholed him at times into a power back, we've talked about his explosive runs downfield. What was it? 8 carries of 40 yards or more the last couple seasons, right? So he's a guy that you add that to, not proven yet, but Chris Johnson. We understand the speed he has. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey needs to continue to add weight to that frame, but another big play guy. You look at the other side here with Manny's group. Again, Knighton, let's not discredit his explosiveness, but the other guys just, they didn't have that burst, right? And they all had their own issues with injuries and whatnot. So to me, you look at the other side here and you have a stable of backs. Now, there's still some unproven guys on this side as well. But even in A.J. Allen, right, we saw at times last year get some important carries for this team. So depth at this spot as well.
Yeah, I think clear upgrade. So we're 2 for 2 on just monstrous upgrades where you have one of the best players in college football leading the charge at both quarterback and running back. I think unquestioned top 10 players at each of those positions. So that's a good way to start. And then you have young talent, which we'll see how it goes, but certainly blue chippers with respect to running back, offense, quarterback, less heralded kind of blue chip signees, but guys that have started at the college level and have won. So that'll be interesting to see. Moving to wide receiver, this was an interesting position because some of the names are the same. So with wide receiver, you still see Restrepo, you still see Jacoby George. Obviously, those guys at that time are not what they are now as far as the fully developed upperclassmen, number 1 and 2 in returning ACC production. So that's a major difference when you talk about wide receivers with Manny, wide receivers with Mario. Look at some of the other names. Keyshawn Smith, sort of nondescript at SMU last year. Romello Brinson, same thing. Brashard Smith, we'll see how he does at SMU. Mike Redding still here. D. Wiggins, just never really put it together. More of a down the field guy, but had questionable hands. And just you didn't see the go-to guy in this group for Manny. I know the first spring practice with Mario, you could really see. Remember that spring game at Lockhart, or I guess what they call it now, Drive Pink. Yeah. You could. The receivers weren't catching the ball. There were plays they weren't making. So that was a major focus of Mario. He developed the guys he had. Also added Sam Brown from Houston, 800-yard receiver. Isaiah Horton's a guy who developed. And then to me, this is where it's going to be real interesting. JoJo Trader, Nye Carr, top 100 receivers, a higher level of recruit than what Manny had. Are those guys going to develop into premier top-of-the-line college receivers who eventually go pro and get picked at nice spots? That's going to be interesting for Mario from an evaluative standpoint. Robbie Washington, Ray Joseph, can he get something out of those guys who have flashed in practice?
By the way, it's Chase Stadium. I knew they changed the name. I'll correct you on it. So, yeah, no, with this group, obviously, it's awesome to see how Xavier Restrepo has developed, right? So that's, we'll give Manny props there because he's a guy who coming out that you could say it was a controversial to some offer, right? There were some people questioning, why Miami. Although he was a big guy down here, but that was a really good recruitment there by Manny for sure. But it's funny, Isaiah Horton, it's a guy who has now obviously stayed on, and he's a body type guy. He's an NFL type body type. So it's interesting to look at some of these guys who are still here on the roster, right, D, as you go through it. And there's a handful of them, not only who were commits, but Xavier Restrepo, and they all have something in common. Either they're great football players, the character is very high, they have the body types. Elijah Arroyo we'll get to now. He's another one that we're very excited about. But it is interesting to look at the guys who did carry over, who are still here on the roster, and there's a reason why they're still here.
No question. And there's a few Manny guys that you see as we go through this that are going to be counted as starters. So those are some interesting names to monitor. Tight end's one of them. So we're moving to the tight end position. Tight end's actually, so we look, wide receiver, I think we give a clear edge to Mario right now with the Miami Hurricanes in terms of just the development of guys, comparing where they were when he inherited them to where they are now, plus the infusion of new blue chip talent. running back, quarterback, premium guys for Mario. Tight end's the one where I'm going to give it right now to Manny and what Mario inherited, which is Will Mallory, who was an NFL tight end. He's drafted in the 5th round. Probably should have been drafted higher, but he came out in a year that was just loaded at the tight end position. I think he's produced at a level that's probably outperformed his draft grade already. He projects as a guy that's going to be part of that team going forward. So he's a real NFL tight end. Khalil Brandley, FAU, hasn't done much. Elijah Arroyo, as a young player here, was on the roster. And then Man Morale and Larry Hodges, really nondescript as far as power 4 type players. Mario, fully developed Elijah Arroyo. I think he's going to be potentially even better than Will Mallory was. And I am a big Will Mallory fan, but that's to be determined. So we can't give it to him now. Here's where it's interesting. The Riley Williams, who is a elite tight end, you beat on Alabama and Ohio State for him. Elijah Lofton, who was a 4-star, lower-ranked guy, but was a talk of spring for what he did. How did those guys who are pure Mario signees develop? I think that will be interesting. So there's a position that I say right now you give it to Manny because we know what Will Mallory is. But I think by the end of the year, you're going to look at this roster of tight ends right now for Mario and say this was a very much improved tight end group.
Agreed. And on Will Mallory, D, in terms of the draft there, the injuries didn't help him as well. He kind of was a little banged up coming into the draft process from his time at Miami. But look, he's got an opportunity now, and that's the beauty of it. Guys who do have medical question marks coming into the league, if they come into the league and stay healthy and produce, it's not even a question mark when it comes up to their next contract. So obviously hope for the best for him these next couple of years here. As we move along here to the offensive line position, which I think this is his finest work in terms of what Mario's done to flip the roster.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things to be gleaned from here. Obviously, look, I think you just look at the names. Everybody knows. You don't have to look at the names. You can look at how it looked when Mario got here, Mario's first year, really, when he had to play with those guys, plus Manny's last year, compared to what it is now, what you saw last year, night and day, just body type wise, production wise. You don't need me to explain that to you. But when I look at the Manny list, something that jumps out, you have Jalen Rivers, who obviously is still here. He was one of the good ones, a blue chip player with great IQ, great work ethic, great size, good athleticism, still here, fully developed. You look at some of these other names. Ja'Kai Clark, small, short, right? Justice Oluwasen, short, about 6'2" or under. Delone Scaife, if he was a center, he'd have decent size, but he was always playing other positions, so he was short. Chris Washington, tall and skinny, but you're really projecting a lot of weight gain for him. Ryan Rodriguez, a center, he's still here. Michael McLaughlin, tall, skinny, a lot of projection. And then Lawrence Seymour, short and a bad body guy. You go to Rivers, who's the guy we mentioned that had the right look. He's still here, fully developed. Ines Cooper, somebody Mario evaluated late in the process in 2022, brought in exactly how you want it to look physically. Noah, of course, we know 5-star player, prototypical. Zach Carpenter, a transfer, but he has the size. You've already seen him in the Big Ten level, big center. Samson Okalola, 5-star. Matthew McCoy, somebody that Manny actually had evaluated and was on. Mario and Mirabal said this was a good eval, closed him, brought him in, tight end body, great size, great athleticism. Markel Bell, we don't talk about his size, big and doesn't need to lose weight or gain too much weight. Tommy Kinsler, same thing. Mentioned Rodriguez kept. Luis Cristobal, he's probably the one that looks more like a Manny guy, even though his last name is Cristobal, but I don't expect him to play a huge role this year. And then, you could go down to sort of the bottom of the roster where you have guys that have some size to them, some upside, but are more developmental guys. So clearly you see an upgrade, not just in production and the way they are, but I think having a specific physical prototype that you want to land at and sticking to it, as opposed to taking a guy that might be too skinny or too short and just trying to make it work.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, Miami's just in position to land certain guys with Mario and Mirabal that they wouldn't have even been in the game for with Manny recruiting that position, right? So you see that with some of the high-profile guys they've landed, such as the Samsons and the Francis of the world, and I think that'll continue to happen. You talk about the body types, but again, at the heart of what we're talking about here is flipping the roster from a transfer portal standpoint and a recruiting standpoint. And look, Manny did do a good job at times with the portal, but if the guys from the high school level that you're looking at here coming in are a completely different animal than what were coming in under Manny.
No question about it. You talk about completely different animal. Canes wear is a completely different animal from other apparel shops in the area, because not only do they have the best stuff with the Canes, they have all Miami sports, including your Florida Panthers, who had a big win yesterday. Get your Panthers gear at caneswear.com or at the store in Davie. Again, they got TVs everywhere, gear everywhere. It's just an awesome place to be. But if you can't be there, caneswear.com, they will take care of you. I think you get orders over $100, you get free shipping. Caneswear.com, absolute best when it comes to Miami sports fans gear. Switching to the DT position. Now, this one's an interesting one for a lot of reasons. So you look at Manny's list, and there are talented guys on Manny's list. I think one of the problems with the defensive tackles with Manny were, number one, the number of defensive tackles, right? The recruiting really fell off a cliff at the end of Manny's tenure, which is why Mario was bringing in guys like Moultrie, Lichtenstein, just to get bodies in the room. That's number one. And then I think number two, you had some character stuff with some of these guys. Nessa Silvera, I'm not sure he would have stayed if Manny was here, and he definitely didn't stay with Cristobal. And it looks like the Raiders might be sick of him already based on some of the stuff he's done on social media. So I think that's sort of the issue there with Silvera. Leonard Taylor, we know the story, work ethic stuff. This guy should have been a first or second round pick, ended up going undrafted. Jordan Miller, solid player, solid for SMU. Jared Harrison-Hunt, we interviewed him, great kid. I think that was more of a culture, difference between going from a Manny guy to being with Mario. But he's a good player. And then Alan Hay went to Temple. I think that fits his talent better. Switching gears with Mario, it's been up and down because a lot of names moving in, moving out. But I think you get a guy like Simeon Barrow, who was a good player in the Big Ten. I believe he was recognized by all Big Ten, not first team, second team, but honorable mention, team captain, productive at Michigan State. CJ Clark, somebody who's had draftable grades coming out of NC State. He's trying to push into that day two range. Again, very reliable, no BS with him. Marley Cook, super worker, great kid. Chrissy Chirinos did a great article about him and how he's helping special needs children with his love of horses. Guy's a weight room animal, squat 705, wrestler, and obviously killed Miami and some of these Manny Diaz offensive line recruits when he came from Middle Tennessee State. So he's a guy, a different mindset. I've heard this from different people in the building, that the defensive tackle room, just mindset-wise, has really shifted with some of the new guys they brought in. You got Ahmad Moden and Josh Horton, two very physically talented guys that Mario recruited. I think defensive tackle recruiting was a little light in the first couple of years, but now you're bringing in a Justin Scott, Armando Blunt, 2 5-stars, Artavius Jones, Dalen Russell. I should also mention Campbell out of Louisiana Monroe, who has people excited with some of his size and speed, some of the stuff he did in spring. So, Pete, what do you see when you look at the defensive tackle room?
I mean, just look at how many more bodies that are there. And again, you look at the Manny side here, and Nesta, we understand had his moments, right, where he was a disruptive player at Miami, but obviously not the biggest frame. Leonard Taylor, you have to rely on him as a very young player at that position, right? Which is not what you're looking to do. And you see over here on the other side with Mario, Justin Scott is the same level of recruit as a Leonard Taylor, but you're not going to have to rely on him as a main guy in the rotation. Could he be a part of it mid-season, later this season when injuries do happen and maybe he just rises as the talent that he is, right, at that spot? But you have proven bodies, multiple guys here who have proven it and done it, which that's going to continue to be my thing. Established players at the high FBS Division I level here. And that's just the main difference to me.
Yeah, to your point, I'm looking at a guy like Dalen Russell from Columbus. He's way lower in the pecking order than someone like Alan Hay was with similar kind of accolades. But looking at Dalen Russell, I got to say, whoever made his highlight reel needs to really reevaluate their career choices, because it was just a poorly made highlight reel. The order was all screwed up. And people that were looking at Dalen Russell, even though he had some good Power 4 offers, they looked at him like a scrub because the size didn't jump out. And then the highlight reel was just really made weird. I got to say, when I watched Dalen Russell in the state championship game, I was surprised by how good he was. He was a pretty dominant player in that game. He had some nice explosiveness, played hard, played all over the front. I was impressed with Dalen Russell. Again, we're not talking about the top of the class or the top of this chart here, really the bottom of this, but he looked like someone that could help and develop into somebody that can play at this level. And Pete, I know you're talking to some people around your alma mater at Columbus, and they're excited about Dalen Russell.
Yeah, I talked to someone who it's not even someone who is a Columbus person, but they're very familiar with South Florida football, and they've seen Columbus play and seen a lot of teams play down here the last couple of years, saying how dominant Dalen Russell was. Now, again, not the prototypical body type, right? But we see with some of these guys on the list here in terms of a Marley Cook, even a Simeon Barrow, right? When he came in, as a freshman, was able to play at Michigan State, but isn't the biggest guy. If you produce as an interior pass rusher like Dalen Russell is, a guy who can play in a little inside outside, we'll see him need to put that good weight on. But man, in terms of a guy who was absolutely dominant and wrecked games in high school at a high level, he's someone who could be a little sleeper here. Again, maybe not right away, maybe not this year, but if he sticks with it and is able to develop his body, then he could be a potential guy there for sure.
Yeah. So defensive tackle, I think I wouldn't say it's a major upgrade like we're talking about running back, quarterback, offensive line, but I think definitely an upgrade in culture, upgrade in production, and upgrade in depth. And then when you factor in the fact that you bring in 5-star freshmen like Scott and Blunt, plus some other guys, the future is looking like it's a major improvement. Whereas with Manny, that defensive tackle recruiting went straight downhill the further he went along. So upgrade there. We're going to shift to defensive end, which is really, to me, a very interesting one, and one that's going to involve a lot of very big, expensive names, which is a good segue to talk about Canes Connection, Miami's official NIL collective. I'm going to have a chat. Today's Thursday. I'm going to have a chat at 7:30 with Canes Connection members, private chat, non-public information that I can't share in a public forum like this or on the website. Going to give you the absolute latest in recruiting, portal, team. Again, straight from direct sources. Sign up. Promo code CIS. You get 20% off your first month, and you get access to the Zoom. And not only do you get the best insider information anywhere, the most direct, and you can figure it out, information anywhere, you're also going to be part of the solution and part of the reason why you have this roster overhaul that we're about to talk about at a position like defensive end. So be part of the solution, canesconnection.com, promo code CIS. The link is in the bio. All right, so defensive end. Just pull up the name, Speed. I mean, it speaks for itself. You got a guy like Jafari Harvey, who's a solid player, limited in certain respects. He's at SMU, like a lot of these guys. Chance Williams, I believe he landed at the University of he landed at an FCS school.
Chattanooga, maybe? Or
Charlotte? Was he at Charlotte?
Yeah, Charlotte, maybe. Yeah.
Not a high power.
Yeah, Charlotte.
Yeah, Charlotte. So not a Power 4 school or even a very productive G5 school. He's someone I thought had a lot of ability, but I think just the natural pass rush and flexibility, fluidity stuff hurt him a little bit. Elijah Roberts, this is one where, and I made a post about this on CanesInSight when he left. Most of the guys that left, you didn't really miss him, but this is a guy that I was like, are we sure we want to lose him? He was playing kickoff at that big body where he's almost defensive tackle size playing kickoff for Miami, showed flashes. He was still young, but I wasn't sure he was the type of guy who wanted to get out the building. And he's turned out to be a really, really good player for SMU. If you talk about all these guys that were kind of out the door when Mario took over in either initially or in his first year, I think Roberts is one that you'd want to bring back because he really ended up being a good player. Cameron Williams, I don't even know where he's at. Jabari Ishmael, Thomas Davis, same. So a lot of washouts here when you look at the Manny list at defensive end. Switching gears to Mario. Ruben Bain, one of the best players in the country. Akeem Messidor, we talked about him yesterday, NFL draftable player, very good college player as well. Tyler Barron, we've been talking about him all week. Impact guy, NFL guy. Elijah Alston, I think PFF has him as the highest graded edge rusher in the country coming back. And then you move on to a guy like Malik Bryant, highly rated recruit, great spring. Marquise Lightfoot, 5-star. Cole McConaughey, underrated recruit, but someone Miami really prioritized the start of the spring game as a true freshman who missed part of spring with an injury. Tells you how talented he is. And then Booker Pickett dominated the offseason circuit, 4-star player who shot up the rankings even more after he was so dominant in the offseason and during the regular season, by the way. Elias Rudolph, another 4-star Miami beat from Michigan. So just production, guys that are good right now, guys that are good for the future. You're not seeing 6'1" guys in this mix. You're not seeing guys that are just physically, don't fit. These are guys with length. These are guys with speed. These are guys with power. These are guys with production. And it's just a complete overhaul to me at the defensive end position.
Yeah, very similar to D tackle. Like we were just talking about, you have a group of established guys, and Bain, Mesidor, need to see him come back from this injury, but there's no reason to believe that he won't. Tyler Barron, is he fully healthy? We don't believe that Miami would have gone all in on him like they did if they didn't think he could be a big impact player for them this year.
Oh, but let me jump on that, because I've seen that question in the comments. Miami knew that there was a labrum issue with Tyler Barron. Obviously, he missed spring. They took a look at it. They're very comfortable. They're treating Barron like an impact player. That is how he was prioritized. That is what they expect from a production standpoint. So medicals are always weird, but I can tell you Miami was aware of the issue going in. And they came out of it saying, we're projecting this guy as an impact guy and valuing him as such. So that actions speak louder than words. I think that's where they view Tyler Barron and his availability to not only play this full season, but also impact the team.
Yeah, and again, with this group, it's like you don't need to project much other than, look, we believe Tyler Barron is fully healthy and ready to go, right? But at the end of the day, he's been productive at this level. The Manny group, especially at that time, Harvey's had done some good things, but still just not where you need to be as a whole. You look at just the pure stats and the sack numbers and the tackles for loss in that group compared to this group, and it's completely different.
Yeah, the defensive end is one of those. I think Miami as a case have the best defensive end room in the nation. I mean, they had that case when you look at 1 to 4 plus some of the young guys, and they were nowhere near that at the end of Manny's tenure. I think one of the big differences, and we're going to get into linebacker in a second, one of the reasons why Manny's defense worked initially and then was so bad at the end of his tenure and then worked again when he went to Penn State is the different personnel at edge rusher and the different personnel at linebacker. Manny, just for whatever reason, when he had Al Golden's guys at those positions, he was rolling. When he had James Franklin's guys at those positions, he was rolling. For whatever reason, his evaluation at those positions really just was not very good during this time period. And as a result, the personnel went down, the group's production went way down, and that's what Mario inherited and had to fix. So you see that big time at defensive end, and at this next position we're going to go to, which is the linebacker position. So here you see the graphic. I got to say, I tend to be optimistic on players, so I try to focus on how they can succeed. Linebacker is one position that I was sounding the alarm. People were saying, Shaq, he lacks speed. We're going to be faster at linebacker. We're going to be better. And I was calling a big time out saying, you guys don't know how good Shaq is, number one. Number two, you don't know how many holes we have with these young players coming up. And I think that bore out when you look at these names. Corey Flagg, limited in his size and speed, was a good player for his limitations, but the limitations were real. Sam Brooks, injuries. Wayne Minsteed, injuries. Frierson just never really regained the form he had during that COVID year. Bradley Jennings, speed and injury questions. Ryan Ragone, size, speed questions. Keontre Smith just never really put it together. Avery Huff, instinct questions. He didn't do anything at FIU. Troutman, lack of size, plus some off the field stuff. Pete, you've seen him up close. He lacks some size there. Tyreek Austin Cave, a guy that never did anything really elsewhere. Jalen Harrell as a striker. I think he's at UMass right now, or Buffalo. He did not end up at a very good school. Chase Smith's still here. Tyler Johnson, I don't know where he's at. And then the commit, Justin Medlock, whom Cristobal did not pursue. He's a part-time player or special teams type player for Utah. Moving on to Mario. Francisco Malinoa, one of the best linebackers in the country. A lot of size, a lot of athleticism, great pass rusher as well. Wesley Bassang, who Mario signed pretty much immediately in that last period, right? Like he committed right there at the transition, and Mario kept him and made sure he was in the class. Really a potential breakout candidate for this year. Jalen Alderman, a guy who was added, who was better than any linebacker Manny had post Shaq and Pickney. And this was someone that was added to be part of the rotation. Popo Aguirre, highly rated guy. Miami beat out Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia. He was someone who played linebacker in high school. This is the type of guy Manny was not getting. Bobby Pruitt, striker. Manny did recruit strikers, but he didn't recruit guys with this kind of athletic ability and striking, for lack of a better term, in terms of the guy that can play safety, play linebacker, super athletic, and run and hit at that level, plus is instinctive. Pruitt, the word I heard on him is he's a potential 3-and-done guy with how talented he is. None of Manny's strikers were in that category. Bobby Washington, great speed. Darius Hayes, top 100 player this year, flipped from Florida. So body type, speed, production, there is no comparison. You talk about gap between where we were and where we're at. I think linebackers right there with offensive line, and just a huge, huge difference.
You have two really established guys here in Mawanoa and Alderman coming over from Louisville. Wesley Basanth, someone who I think is an ascending player. D has been here for a couple years, but I think not only does he continue to mature and grow into his body, but had a strong spring and I think can get sideline to sideline, has the quicks. You look at the rest of these guys, and having been to a few practices on the media side of things, you can just see how it looks way different up close with some of these guys. The thumping sounds different, right? So that group as a whole, I mean, Chase Smith is still here. He's someone who dealt with his injuries early in his career, but I think, again, has put on some really good weight, looks the part. As long as he's healthy, I think he could be someone who also helps this team.
Yeah, and look, it's funny that we go from really the position of the most overhaul, right, along with offensive line, a linebacker to defensive back positions where I think it's even or maybe even a step back in certain respects. So we've been pretty much Mario overhaul across the board, big check mark, huge difference. Now is where I think it gets a little more interesting as we go to the end here. So safety position. Manny had Cam Kitchens, James Williams, 3rd-round pick, and a 6th-round pick, right? James was a 6th-rounder to Tennessee as a linebacker. Avante Williams, highly rated player, didn't pan out. I believe he's still in the portal. Brian Balaam, Keyshawn Washington, they never really got going. And then he had commitments. T-Rob, for Manny, had secured commitments from Marquise Williams and Jaden Harris, who are key players for this year's team. Flipping to Mario, Mish Powell from Washington, a starter on Washington's runner-up national runner-up team. Really good spring, really good player. Jaden Harris, a guy who's committed to Manny, stayed with him and with Mario. I like where he's at. Zaquan Patterson, this is probably the biggest feather in the cap for Mario, a blue chip, top 100, top 75 type player at safety who Mario brought in, had a very good spring. Looks like he's going to be a big player on this year's team and the future. Marquise Williams, we mentioned, committed already to Manny and T-Rob, stuck with his commitment during the coaching change. Dylan Day, safety / nickel. Isaiah Thomas, guy from Clearwater. These are both true freshmen. Isaiah Thomas was injured, didn't really play in spring. So, to me, Cam Kitchens is the best player of this group. Certainly at the college level and probably in the pro level too as a 3rd-round pick. Could have gone even higher. He was an All-American. James Williams, even though he's really a linebacker, you couldn't beat him out, right, at safety. Mario was not able to unseat him with the guys he recruited. The rest of the guys, as far as the Manny guys, didn't really do anything. But, I think there's a position that when you look at the safety chart for Mario, it's a little thin. You really, really need Zaquan Patterson to be a dude, I think, to make this look a little better.
And it's interesting because I think Coach Banda deserves a lot of credit in how he recruited that position. I think maybe at times when he was here, the fans didn't appreciate he was a better recruiter than they realized. And now he's coaching in the NFL, right? So you look at how things turn out after the fact, and you understand why maybe this room had the talent that it did have in it. And Avante Williams was a huge recruit, obviously number 1 safety in the country at the time. So we're trying to look at this as when it happened at the time, right? And we were very, very excited about the future of that room there. James Williams was a 7th-round pick, by the way. I just checked into it. It was pick 242. So
yeah, and glad you mentioned Banda. So Banda was someone they always called him the bartender, and I defended him at the time, and so did you, Pete, because you looked at guys like Redwine. This is before this list, but guys like Redwine and Jaquan Johnson, how they developed, even at Robert Knowles, where he started, where he finished. I think people really forgot how good Banda was. And the thing was, Banda, Adai's in the NFL too, but I think the difference between a Banda and an Adai is both great coaches. That's why they're in the NFL as far as technicians. I think Banda was much more in tune with his defensive coordinator. He knew what Manny wanted. He was able to execute on that. Adai, there was always some sort of disconnect there. And then the recruiting. Banda liked recruiting. Adai didn't, or at least I don't know if he liked it or not, but he was good at it. Adai wasn't. They don't have to worry about that in the pros, but I think that's why Banda was such an effective coach at Miami, and Adai really was not, even though they're both at the same level right now. But that's a position where we need Zaquan Patterson to be that guy. I thought he showed a lot of flashes in spring. I think he's going to play a lot as a true freshman. Guys at that recruiting level who are physically ready and get here early, unless there's something wrong, tend to play early, regardless of depth. So I think it's not necessarily a depth issue why he's playing, but we do need him to play because the depth is not that good. So that's something to watch there. I think Mish Powell will be good. And I think Jaden Harris, I like where he's trending. Marquise Williams, another interesting name, had a good spring. Can he carry that over with a very good summer and some discipline and some maturity? He's his third year. He has talent. Cornerback. Now, I'm taking us back to the podcast we were doing, Pete, when I was watching practice early on. In the first Mario practices, I would come back and I'd say, man, our corners look like NFL dudes, right? And then it was funny because when you saw the corners get cooked later on, you said maybe the corners weren't that good and it was just the receivers weren't that good, right? Because remember the first year of Mario, we had big problems at receiver. I think it was a little bit of both because Tyreek Stevenson, second-round pick, ended up starting pretty much every game for Chicago. It looks like a really good young player for them. And then our boy, DJ Ivey, the much maligned DJ Ivey, not only made the Bengals, not only got a game ball for his special teams work, but he was playing snaps on defense, real snaps, like during competitive NFL games, not mop up for the Bengals towards the end of the year. He probably would have played even more, got hurt. He's on the road to recovery. I still hope for big things from him. But these were two guys that were playing NFL cornerback snaps as rookies on good teams. At least Ivey's team was good. Stevenson's team's not so much, but he certainly played at a high level. So we took for granted, I think, some of the size and athleticism of those guys compared to where we're at now. To Corey Couch, nickel, played a lot, solid. Malik Curtis, Isaiah Dunson, Marcus Clark, not a lot from those guys, at least at Miami. They did transfer to Power 4 programs. I know Clark played a little bit, so we'll see how those guys develop. But when you look at Mario, this is a position we talked about Adai. I just don't think it's been recruited to the right level. This year in 2025, you're seeing the Ben Hankses, the DJ Pickett's, a little higher level recruiting, hopefully. Daryl Porter, portal addition, who ended up being a very solid ACC cover guy. I don't know if he's as talented as a Stevenson or an Ivey physically, but probably produce more. At let's say, as far as a college cover corner. Damari Brown is more physically in line with those other two. Unproven, though, to this point. We'll see how he goes. Jadis Richard, another long athletic guy. Again, Brown and Richard look the part. They look like Stevenson and Ivey. Let's see if they can produce. Ivey never really produced here, so you hope to get more from them. Deone Hill, good transfer from Marshall, familiar with the system. Robert Stafford, I know they have high hopes. And then the true freshmen, Mac and Frederic from St. Thomas, who are arriving now. So, I mean, to me, I think for this group to be as good as the prior group, it's going to be about guys like Brown and Richard really meeting their ceiling.
Yeah, I think the jury's still out for sure because we understand what the talent group, although it's like that producing at that level here, then what does it really matter what the talent was at that time? So some talented guys in this Mario group now. Daryl Porter, a very proven player at this level. Damari Brown had a really strong end to the season last year and is a blue chip type prospect. But you just said it there. I mean, Jadis Richard, Deone Hill, you have some of these young guys there. Not as much proven depth there, but talented nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm looking up actually because some of these names I hadn't looked at in a while. But Marcus Clark actually for your boy Drink at Missouri had 2 picks. Didn't play a ton, but he did play. which is interesting because Missouri was a good team last year, a good defense. It got Baker, another Miami name, that opportunity with LSU for being a good defense in Missouri. So just interesting to keep track of some of those guys. But I think really let's see how Porter I know he's going to do, but let's see how Brown and Richard develop before we call it a wrap here. So I think, look, Pete, overall, defensive back is going to be in a position where you need to see improvement in recruiting. Tight end, you're banking on Arroyo and Williams to take a big step up. I think you'll get that. Otherwise, this was a major sweep for a talent overhaul. When you look at where it was to where it is, Mario's turned this quarterback room into one of the best rooms in the country, running back room into one of the best rooms in the country because of the top end guys, wide receiver. You got 3 guys over 800 yards, plus some very talented young guys. Offensive line, one of the best units in the country. D tackle, just a more solid group with more depth, plus 5 stars coming up. D end, one of the best rooms, if not the best room in the country. Linebacker, very strong from a position of weakness. I just think it's night and day. You hired Mario to overhaul the roster. That was his objective number 1. You didn't hire him for his X's and O's. And I think you're seeing that when you really go through position by position.
Look, there's always going to be questions going into a season, but I think that you can nitpick, but there are very few real holes on this team. There's positions that there are unproven players. Of course, we've talked about those spots, just like the cornerback and safety rooms. But as a whole, you usually go into a season and say, well, there's 5 or 6 legitimate concerns, at least the last 10, 15 years as being Canes fans. I think there's very few of those this time around.
Yep, this is no question a 10-win, 11-win, double-digit win roster that should be contending for an ACC title and a playoff berth, and we'll see what happens. A lot of analysis to come, a lot of football to watch. You will be with us, hopefully, every single step of the way because we're going to be giving it to you daily. Like and subscribe to this podcast. We're on every day, all the way through the season, and every day. We're not going to stop. We're not taking any vacations. Canes Insight Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Go Canes.
Go Canes.